Hey Repros, if you're craving more reproductive justice podcasts to geek out on, and you're curious how abortion and reproductive health play out beyond the U.S., then let me introduce you to Aborsh. Aborsh, like a cute abortion, is a Canadian podcast that explores what choice really means and looks like, and why that answer is different for different people. Now in its second season, host Rachel Carnes talks to people who've had abortions at all different stages of pregnancy and phases of life, connecting their stories to the bigger systems shaping our world, from rent and birth control to carceral systems, colonial legacies, and democracy itself. Yeah, it's a lot, but somehow Aborsh makes space for all of it. It's that rare show that doesn't just point out the problems, it reminds us that collectively we have power, and that change is possible. Plus, it's smart, candid, and even funny, because sometimes we need to laugh while riding the hot mess express that is society right now. So, if you want to feel informed, inspired, and a little less alone, check out Aborsh wherever you're listening right now. Welcome to Repros Fight Back, a podcast on all things related to sexual and reproductive health rights and justice. Hi, Repros. How's everybody doing? I'm your host, Jenny Wetter, and my pronouns are she, her. Well, before we get to the, bad and terrible, let's, start off with, some happiness again. Last week, I talked to you about my excitement about Wisconsin State Supreme Court striking down a 176-year-old abortion ban, which was amazing news out of Wisconsin. This week, the Wisconsin State Supreme Court was back upholding a ban on conversion therapy. So it is so wonderful to see them standing up for our rights, to block an abortion ban, to ensure that the ban on conversion therapy stays in place. I am just so excited for my friends and family who are still in Wisconsin, who no longer have to fear these restrictions that were in place or worry about conversion therapy. So feeling like a very proud Wisconsinite, happy Badger today. So I wanted to share that piece of good news, since there is a lot of other just not great news, right? Since we last talked, the terrible, big, beautiful bill, I feel stupider every time I say it, y'all. Hopefully we don't have to talk about it much anymore, but there's so much terrible in it, was passed and signed into law. So many terrible things in it. A huge, massive increase of funding for ICE, which is not good. Massive cuts to Medicaid, ban on funding for Planned Parenthood, massive tax cuts for the wealthy, cuts to food stamps. Y'all, just so much terrible in one terrible, terrible bill. So many people are going to be hurt by all of these provisions, and I'm sure we'll talk about the fallout from it for so much more. But just, not good, y'all. Really worried about that massive funding increase for ICE, really worried about the defunding of Planned Parenthood and what that's going to do for access to care, really worried about the huge cuts in SNAP benefits and the loss of Medicaid and what that's going to mean for people on Medicaid, but also for people who aren't on Medicaid but are going to be impacted by rural hospitals being forced to close. The hospital I grew up going to is considered a rural hospital, so it could be impacted. There is so much that I am worried about, all of the people who are going to be harmed because of these terrible decisions that were made to support this bill. Yeah, so again, just let's go back to the happiness of thinking about Wisconsin State Supreme Court doing the right things and that being really wonderful. And I'm going to choose to focus on that part. But yeah, just feeling really heavy this week with knowing that this bill was signed into law and what it is going to mean for people's lives around the country. And most of it is not good. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else exciting. I've been back to baking a little bit, which was exciting. I think I told you all before last week I made really yummy flourless peanut butter chocolate chip cookies, which were really good. This weekend, I made oat muffins with little jammy bits in them, which were very good. I had those for breakfast all week. I'm going to try and make something again this weekend. Like I said, I've really fallen off the baking train, and so I am trying to get back on it. It does bring me joy. I know that people love seeing what I post when I share what I've made, so I want to get back to it. So I think that's where I'm at right now. I think that's probably enough chit chat. I'm sure you want to hear what we're going to talk about this week because it is a really important conversation. I am talking to Dr. Regina Davis Moss with In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda, to talk about the Medina decision at the Supreme Court and what that is going to mean in people's lives, but particularly focusing on Black women. And it's really great conversation, and I hope you all enjoy it. So let's go to my conversation with Dr. Davis Moss. Hi, Dr. Davis Moss. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Jenny. So glad to be here.
I'm very excited to talk to you about the Medina decision at the Supreme Court. But before we get started, would you like to take a second and introduce yourself and include your pronouns?
Sure. Dr. Regina Davis Moss, President and CEO of In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. And my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm really excited to talk to you about this decision because it is going to have some really wide-ranging impacts. But before we can talk about the impacts, maybe we should talk about the case, and it's Medina versus Planned Parenthood of South Atlantic. What was this case about?
Yeah, I mean, what the case was about was, for me, what it boiled down to was really everything that we have been trying to talk about with regard to reproductive justice, that where you live, your geography and your ability to pay and your income is really now going to be how you access care. When we think about reproductive justice, this is what the 12 founding mothers were trying to uplift, that, we live in a system in the United States where there's the two-tiered healthcare system, where there's two types of healthcare. And if you can pay for better healthcare, then you get that. If not, then you have to rely on our public healthcare system. And so what that case was just saying is that, if you are on Medicaid, there is a provision in there that says you should have the right to choose your provider. And that case said that people didn't have that right, or at least they didn't have the right to sue. But, that's really, in my mind, a sort of, formality in terms of where we're ultimately going to end up, which is that, this is just the beginning of a growing pattern that we have seen in terms of restricting access. Now we're talking about just reproductive health care. This is what I want people to really understand, is that case was not about abortion. That was just about care, right? But it just, is the beginning, only the beginning of what we're going to see. So, we're going to get into contraception, screening, prenatal care, even the abortion drug. Like, this is really, it was a sad day for me. And just in terms of, it was struck right at the heart of everything we fight for in terms of reproductive justice. We are saying that we need to center access. We need to center autonomy, and we need to center equity, and that all of those are impacted when we look at things like race, class, gender, and obviously where we live. In this case, it was South Carolina, and those systems intersect as well as exacerbate, issues that get in the way of people being able to self-determine their reproductive lives.
I really liked how you framed that. I think it is such this bigger question, and it is often getting lost in the discussion because Planned Parenthood brought the case, and yes, it's about Planned Parenthood in some ways, but it was bigger than that, right? It wasn't just about your ability to access care at Planned Parenthood, because that's just the start. Yeah,
it's just really, it's restricting the autonomy based on where somebody lives and the type of insurance they have. And, it goes to what we have always said, is that rights need to be focused in real world access, not just laws. We have to make sure that people understand that anytime we put up any sort of barrier, then it's going to delay care. It is going to increase, maternal mortality, infant mortality. We talked about this. It wasn't just about abortion. This was about reproductive and preventive services. and so now those things hinge on the laws of your state. They're not just your constitutional right anymore. And this is it's devastating, and it is not going to stop. It is a growing pattern, and it just really, again, illustrates how where you live in this country, what is supposed to be the land of the free, how your access to care is going to really depend on where you live.
I feel like this has just become more and more true over the years. And as somebody who grew up in a rural area, now I would say like a purplish state. I grew up in Wisconsin. Like I really feel that. And I think about that in terms of access to Medicaid, or even thinking through the reconciliation bill that is happening that could really gut Medicaid. Mm-hmm. It is going to impact those who have the most need of access to that healthcare. And I think it's important that people understand that it is going to impact everybody as well. So if your local hospital is not able to get Medicaid reimbursements, your local rural hospital may not be able to stay open. And so this is going to impact everybody.
That's right. I mean, we're already in situations where people are already having to drive an hour because they don't have full for delivery or whatever type of services. Sometimes the specialized services aren't available in their local in health care, whether that be a provider or urgent care center or a community health center. And so they will, particularly in rural areas, they're already having to drive. So imagine if this bill goes forward, we know that's like $1 trillion, in cuts, and it is absolutely going to have an impact on the availability of care. It is already projected that 17 million people will lose their health coverage. So that's health coverage. But then we have to talk about, if the healthcare facilities aren't there. I have long said that we have been talking about these issues. We've been trying to raise the alarm bell on them. I mean, if you think about, when you're driving in a car and the warning light comes on, you can keep driving, but if you ignore it, sooner or later, that engine is going to give out on you. And that's what we're seeing with our healthcare system. It was already very, very tenuous on shaky ground. And now we have been saying for years, that the warning light is on. And now we're going to be in significant trouble. It's going to break down.
So I think it's also really important to talk about who is going to be the most impacted. Do you want to talk a little bit about who is going to feel the impacts the most from the Supreme Court decision?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, at In Our Own Voice, we champion the human and civil rights for Black women, girls, and gender expansive people every day, because we think it's important for people to understand just how devastating any sort of sustained and ongoing attack on our human and civil rights are. This is just one example with the Supreme Court ruling. It is just absolutely a direct attack for a number of reasons, right? It's because of Black women. 2/3 of births by Black birthing people are covered by Medicaid. Over half of Black girls under 17 are on Medicaid. 1 in 4 Black women rely on Medicaid. So it is very critical for healthcare services. And, we're not just talking about abortion. We are talking about, these life-saving services like STI testing, breast cancer screening, birth control, so much more. And so, when we talk about the impact, it is not an understatement to say that this will be devastating, that this will cut us off at the knees. This is a lifeline program for so many Black women, girls, and gender expansive people.
Yeah, it's the ability to take control and plan your life.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, this is what it is. So frustrating sometimes to keep having to ring this alarm bell to say like, this is why we have been fighting for reproductive justice, because it is about access to comprehensive, affordable health care, including all the things that I just talked about, but, maternal care. And that's a core tenet of reproductive justice. And so And when we do that, then we're able to exercise that right to have children, to not have children, to parent those children in safe and sustainable environments. And by cutting access to Medicaid, both through the Supreme Court decision, but also based on what is happening with this current bill that is moving through Congress and the direct cuts to that, it is a direct threat on reproductive justice because it denies millions of people the resources they need to make informed, supported decisions in accessible ways in their communities, and so that they can, thrive.
I think it's so easy to talk about all of these things in a vacuum, right? Like, we'll talk about the cuts on Medicaid here. We'll talk about abortion bans here. We'll talk about Black maternal mortality here. But this is all the same story, right? It is so important that they are talked about together and how they are exacerbating. And well, I guess not each other, because like Black maternal mortality is being exacerbated by these other two things that are making an already terrible crisis so much worse.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, I don't think people should be looking at them as separate because they're, in my opinion, by design, occurring in parallel tracks. Because that is that is the goal, to completely destabilize our healthcare system. We need to make sure that people really understand what is at stake here. If you look at Project 2025, it is already there. We already knew. We had a very good sense of what the dangers were going to be. They told us exactly what they were going to do. And we're watching this play out in real time. We are under threat like never before. We should not be looking at this as if, oh, well, this is just coincidental here. They are taking very bold, calculated steps, and we need to respond in kind with bold, urgent action that is really going to confront the various attacks that are happening across all of these different places. There's attacks on gender identity. There's attacks on care. There's attacks on, SNAP benefits. Like, we're going to be hungry, dead, and unable to survive.
Yeah, I feel like that just needed a second to sink in for everybody of how dire the situation is at the moment. I really love that you talked about we need a bold plan of action. Can you talk a little bit about the plan that y'all have worked on for the RJ agenda?
Yeah, I am so glad you asked that. We, on Thursday, the same day as we heard about the Medina versus Planned Parenthood case, we were already on the Hill and we were launching our 2025 Black Reproductive Justice Policy Agenda. This is something that we release every 2 years and ahead of the new Congress. And it's more than just a policy document. It is really literally a guidebook, the playbook. It is a call to action for lawmakers on how to do this work. It is over 125 policy recommendations put forth by over 50 organizations, policy experts, activists, and it is there to protect and uplift Black women, girls, and gender expansive people. But in our perspective, just as when the 12 Black women created the reproductive justice movement, when Black women, because we are some of the most marginalized, dismissed, forgotten about people in the United States, when we do better, we all do better. And so just as those 12 Black women gave this incredible gift of the reproductive justice framework to the United States, which is now a global movement at this point, this is what this policy agenda is. It is grounded in science. It is based in what we know that's been heavily researched to work. Everything from, doulas and midwifery, comprehensive sex ed, environmental and economic justice. What are the policies that we know work that are going to help advance this work so that ultimately, for us, we are fighting for people to have their reproductive lives affirmed, however that is. And that can be either to want to have a child, to not have a child, or to just be able to live out loud in terms of your sexuality, your gender identity, or whoever you love.
I love a bold plan of action. I am always a fan of seeing what all we need to do, because there are so many areas that are so interrelated, but yet people don't often connect all of the dots that need to be connected. So I'm always a big fan of having policy agendas that try to do that.
Yeah, it just warmed my heart to, number one, all of the responses that we received when we released it, but just to get calls from people and say, oh my God, there's everything in here. There's something for my work, whether you are working in breast care, whether you are working with incarcerated individuals, it really does range in terms of how we need to address this issue, because we've always known that this is not siloed work. You are not going to be able to advance reproductive justice by only looking at it in terms of whether or not you have the right to have an abortion. Honestly, you are getting it wrong if that is where you think the conversation should end and start. We need to talk about things like, can people stay in school? Can people keep their job? Can people who already have a pre-existing health condition safely carry a pregnancy? Do they have access to, health care so that they can get in early to have prenatal care or to have screening? Are they struggling with, fertility issues? How do we make sure Black women and gender expansive people are able to access care? Because, by the way, the research shows that we tend to get into care later, and then our success rates tend to not be as high. So, it's really important that we are calling attention to the unique health outcomes and experiences of Black women, girls, and gender expansive people, so that we can make sure that people are not just creating a one-size-fits-all policy, but one that is really going to directly address the unique needs and the lived experiences.
That is such an important point. You so often hear people focusing on, if we could just do this one thing, or this one policy will make everything so much better. But it's so much more nuanced and complicated than that. You need to be able to address so many different aspects of people's lives and addressing them as a whole person. It's so great to hear that is how your agenda is approaching this.
Yeah. Can I tell you a story about what that shows?
Always.
When we're talking about, everyone is concerned about the well-being of children. We find that is largely something that both parties agree upon, right? So, I have been in the community and I have talked to young students who have to, every day when they walk to school, walk past abandoned buildings where one of them, they were sexually assaulted, so that speaks to safe and sustainable communities, right? Then they're walking into their school where they have to walk through a metal detector. So then there's a narrative that we are continuing to impose about certain communities and the need to be over surveilled and over policed. But, we need to think about the kid who's coming to school, who's hungry, right? So they're coming to school, maybe because that's the only meal they're going to get that day, breakfast and lunch, right? So what are some things that we can do? We have policies that say, because our policies are both big P and little p, like big policy and little policy, right? So maybe it's something as simple as having a fresh fruit or a protein bar or a granola bar right there at the metal detectors, so that any student who's walking by that can grab that. And then the issues around hunger and poverty are destigmatized, right? Some kids are not going to school because they're being teased, because maybe they don't have running water, right? And so they don't have the opportunity to, wash their clothes. But by doing things like placing security guards by the showers, so people can shower, or even, bringing in laundry facilities, and so students can come and wash their clothes, you are creating opportunity for people to stay in school and to, be not shamed and not have to be, subjected to stigma, but most important to be able to learn so that they can go on to be productive and citizens that contribute to the society, right? Because at the end of the day, what we have to be very clear on is that the face of the nation is changing, right? Right now, we know that every child born, half of them, 50%, or one in two children that are born is a person of color, right? So it is really on us to make sure that everybody is healthy, that everyone can produce, right? We're always concerned about how we are going to be competitive with these other nations and, how do we stay on top? Well, we stay on top by making sure that we're taking care of our own, that we are providing the resources and the opportunities to be able to do so, to be able to, we want our kids to be able to focus when they're in class. And so, that's just one example of the various ways that one of the tenets in terms of the right to raise your child in a safe and sustainable environment can be so far reaching. And it's, it just can't simply be about healthcare.
I think that's one of the things that makes reproductive justice so simple in so many ways, but also so expansive because it is like all of the things, right? It is everything you need to live in a safe and healthy environment, to make the decisions to have kids, to not have kids. It's so many things, but it has like that simple basic tenet behind it, even if enacting it involves this huge array of policies to ensure that you can get to this basic core tenet of safe, healthy lives and making basic decisions about whether to have kids or not.
Yeah, I think if you just, again, don't center this only about abortion, right? Like at its core, it's about having control over our body, our life, our future, our families. And however you show up in that, that includes our sexuality, that includes our reproduction, but it's about the bodily autonomy and having the human right for that to be affirmed.
Okay. So I always like to wrap up the episodes, not just talking about what is happening and what people need to be worried about, what is coming down the pike with policies, but how can they get involved? So if the audience wants to get involved in fighting for these issues, what can they do?
Oh, number one, make sure that you are following in our own voice. www.blackrj.org is our website. Black Women's RJ are our socials. You can follow us across all of our social media. We are always trying to work very hard to make sure that we are breaking down the day-to-day policy news in a way that you can understand and how it is relevant to you. And then when you get that information, you take it back to your community, take it back to your tribe, take it back to your friends and family, because honestly, your listeners, you are actually the best advocates, right? Think about when a friend or a loved one or someone that you care about and you trust tells you something and educates you on something you don't know. You act upon it and you also share it, right? And so that's what we want to do, is to make sure that people are getting the information so that they are empowered. So yes, we would say, we like to tell people, start with your kitchen table. So those are the people that are close to you. But also, in a time right now where we are every day seeing policies that are threatening our health and well-being crop up, contact your elected official. Let them know that you are not happy with this policy is going to do, and tell them how it's going to impact you directly. We have to remember that they work for us. There is somehow something happens where we don't believe that we can hold them accountable, and that, I want people to know that just as easy as it was to vote them in, it's easy to vote them out. So don't, adopt the thinking that it's hopeless and nothing's going to change and there's nothing we can do. There's absolutely something we can do. That is how we have seen historically things happen. At some point, the people speak up. They say they've had enough. They begin to apply the pressure and we see change. And so that's absolutely something we should do. And then we don't need to wait. We don't have to wait for an election year to do that. We can do that at all levels. You can do that with your school board. You can do that with your library board. You can do that with any area that I talked about where you find that is personally relevant to you. Find out who are the leaders, who are the decision makers, and become educated on, the types of things they are trying to enact. And if you agree, absolutely, we should be supportive. We want to make sure we're normalizing good policy right now, especially when we're seeing a lot of things that are very harmful. So let them, we want to make sure that the policy makers that are doing a good job know that we like what they're doing and give them the pat on the back. But the ones that aren't, we want to make sure that they hear us loud and clear and that they can't ignore us. We will not be silenced. And then, these are more than ever. Members of Congress will tell you that it's tough right now. And so they really do rely on grassroots organizations to be able to do some of the work that they can't. So it's important to keep supporting those organizations that are doing great things in your community. They're the ones that are going to continue to be sound the alarm on the things that are most important. And, there's so many things. I just would want people to know that, you don't have to be a activist, someone that's been working in these movement for decades. All you need to do is, if a cause is important to you, if an issue is important to you, figure out how you can help. Maybe that is just answering a phone, but any little act can make a difference.
Regina, thank you so much for being here. It was so fun to talk to you today about the Supreme Court decision, but also to talk about your policy agenda. It was great to hear about it.
Thanks so much. It's always great talking to you, Jenny.
Okay, y'all, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Davis Moss. I had a wonderful time talking to her and hearing about what the implications were going to be from this Medina decision. There's, again, just so much heavy happening. But I'm very excited for next week's episode because we're going to get part 2 of the Title X providers talking about the implications of the Trump administration freezing their funding. So I'm very excited to share their stories with you. And so we will have 3 more providers sharing their story next week. So I will see y'all then. If you have any questions, comments, or topics you would like us to cover, always feel free to shoot me an email. You can reach me at Jenny, Jennie, at reprosfightback.com, or you can find us on social media. We're at Repros Fight Back on Facebook and Twitter, or Repros FB on Instagram. If you love our podcast and want to make sure more people find it, take the time to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Or if you want to make sure to support the podcast, you can also donate on our website at reprosfightback.com. Thanks all.